There are words that don't leave your skin, that stick to your soul like invisible scars. Has been. Someone who used to be. Someone who doesn't matter anymore. That's what they called me. At 67 years old, after decades devoted to my family, my home, my husband, after giving up my dreams so they could achieve theirs, has been. I was sitting in the living room of my own house when I heard it. My son, that little boy I rocked in my arms through countless feverish nights, was talking to his wife in the kitchen. They didn't know I was there. And maybe that's better, because the truth hurts less when you steal it from people who didn't have the courage to say it to your face. Mom's getting old, outdated, a has-been. She doesn't understand anything about business anymore, about money, about real life. I felt my chest tighten, not because of the word itself, but because of what it carried. Contempt. The same contempt I saw in my husband's eyes years before, when he left me for a younger woman. The contempt of someone who thinks age is synonymous with uselessness. Have you ever been treated like you had no more value? Like your wrinkles were synonymous with incompetence? Like time had erased everything you are and everything you still could be? That night, alone in my room, I looked in the mirror. I saw the white hair, the lines around my eyes, the hands that had held so many things and let so many others slip away. And that's where I made the most important decision of my life. I wasn't going to prove anything to anyone. I was going to prove it to myself. Because you see, when you spend 6 decades being a mother, a wife, a homemaker, a caregiver, you forget who you were before all that. You forget you had dreams, ambitions, fire inside your chest. And it was that fire, the one I thought had gone out years ago, that started burning again that night. Over the next 3 years, I built something nobody expected, not even me. I created a business from scratch, learned about investments, technology, digital markets. I studied like a college student. I worked like a young entrepreneur. And I won like a woman who had nothing left to lose. Today, my bank account has 7 figures. My company employs dozens of people. And my name, the one they called has been, is on contracts, partnerships, investments. But the money? That wasn't the most important part. The most important part was the day my son called me. His voice was shaking. He had just found out. And he apologized. He cried. He said he regretted it. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I just listened to the silence between us. That heavy silence that carries years of pain, of hurt, of wounded love. And then I answered, with the firm voice of someone who had risen from her own ashes. I don't need your approval anymore. I never did. What I needed was to remember who I am. If you're here, watching this from somewhere in the world, I want you to know this. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how many times they called you too old, too slow, too incapable. Life doesn't end when you get older. It starts over when you decide you still have something to prove to yourself. Comment below where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt invisible at some point in your life, leave a heart down below. You're not alone. But let me take you back. Back to where it all began. Not the business, not the money, but the pain. Because that's where every real story starts, isn't it? In the place where your heart breaks so completely that you think you'll never breathe normally again. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because Tuesdays were always my day. The day I'd go to the farmer's market, buy fresh flowers, make something special for dinner. Small rituals that made me feel like I had purpose. I had just turned 64. My husband, Robert, had left me 2 years prior. 38 years of marriage, gone in a single conversation. I'm not happy anymore, he said. As if happiness was something you could just pick up at a store when your current model stopped working. He married her 6 months later. Kristen. She was 39. Blonde. Worked in marketing. Had that confident laugh of someone who's never had to watch their dreams die slowly, one compromise at a time. I didn't fall apart. Not the way people expected. I didn't cry at the grocery store or call him drunk at midnight. I did something worse. I disappeared into myself. I became a shadow in my own life. My daughter Emma called once a week out of obligation. My son David, the one who would later call me a has-been, visited once a month, always in a hurry, always checking his phone. I had become optional. A checkbox on someone else's to-do list. Visit mom. Check. That's the thing about getting older as a woman. Society doesn't just ignore you. It erases you. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day you realize you've been talking for 5 minutes and nobody's listening. You become furniture. Background noise. A relic from a time people prefer to forget. I spent 2 years like that. Existing, but not living. Going through motions, but not feeling anything. I volunteered at the library. I joined a book club where women my age talked about grandchildren and recipes and how fast time flies. Time doesn't fly. It crawls when you have nothing to look forward to. But that Tuesday, something shifted. I was at the market holding a bunch of dahlias when I overheard two women talking. One of them was maybe 40, dressed in expensive athleisure, the kind that costs more than my weekly grocery budget used to be. She was on the phone, talking loudly like people do when they want everyone to hear how important they are. Just sold another property. God, I love this. Making money while I sleep. These old people have no idea how the world works now. They're still thinking about pensions and social security while we're building actual wealth. She laughed. That casual, dismissive laugh. My grandmother keeps asking me for money. Like, maybe if you had planned better, you wouldn't be broke at 70. But that generation just didn't think ahead. I stood there, clutching those flowers so tightly that the stems started to break in my hands. Old people. That generation. As if we were a different species. As if we hadn't built the very world she was profiting from. Something inside me cracked. Not broke. Cracked. And through that crack, something old and fierce started to seep out. I went home and I did something I hadn't done in years. I got angry. Real, burning, righteous anger. I threw those flowers in the trash. I made a pot of coffee. And I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, the one I barely knew how to use beyond checking email and looking at photos Emma occasionally sent. And I started researching. If you've ever felt that moment, that precise instant when you decide you're done being small, done being quiet, done accepting the story everyone else wrote for you, leave a comment below. Tell me about it. Because that moment, that's when everything changes. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. I just knew I needed to understand how the world had moved on without me, how people were making money in ways I didn't understand, how younger people seemed to navigate life with a confidence I'd lost somewhere between my first mortgage and my last anniversary. I spent hours that day reading articles about digital businesses, e-commerce, affiliate marketing, drop shipping, words I'd never heard before, concepts that seemed like a foreign language. My neck hurt, my eyes burned, my fingers cramped from typing. But I didn't stop, because for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than numb. I felt curious. I felt challenged. I felt alive. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing with possibilities and questions, and a tiny fragile spark of something I was afraid to name. Hope. The next morning, I did something even more radical. I called my bank and asked about my accounts. The divorce settlement had left me with the house, paid off, and about $78,000 in savings. Robert had kept most of the retirement accounts, the investment properties, the valuable stuff. My lawyer had told me to take it. You're 62, she said. Fighting will cost more than you'll win. Take the settlement and move on. So I did, like a good girl, like I'd always been told to do. But now, looking at those numbers on the screen, I saw something different. Not the end of my financial life, but the beginning. $78,000. It wasn't enough to retire on. Not for another 20 or 30 years if I was lucky. But it was enough to start something. I just had to figure out what. I spent the next 3 weeks doing something I hadn't done since college. I studied. Really studied. Not the casual browsing you do when you're bored, but the deep, focused kind of learning that makes your brain hurt and your coffee go cold because you forgot it was there. I watched YouTube videos at 2 in the morning. I took notes in a spiral notebook like a teenager preparing for finals. I joined Facebook groups full of people talking about passive income and side hustles and financial freedom. Most of them were young, 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. They used abbreviations I had to Google. They talked fast and assumed knowledge I didn't have. They posted screenshots of their earnings, their sales, their success stories. And I'll be honest, at first I felt like an imposter. Like I'd walked into a party where I didn't know anyone and everyone was speaking a language I barely understood. But here's what I learned about being older, about being underestimated, about being dismissed. It makes you invisible. And invisibility? That's a superpower if you know how to use it. Nobody expected anything from me. Nobody was watching. Nobody cared if I failed because nobody believed I could succeed in the first place. That meant I could experiment. I could make mistakes. I could try things without the pressure of proving myself to anyone but me. So I started small. I found a course online about e-commerce. It cost $97. I stared at the checkout page for 20 minutes before clicking purchase. $97 felt like a fortune. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because spending money on myself, on my education, on something that might not work, felt dangerous. Selfish, even. I'd spent 40 years buying things for other people. School supplies, soccer cleats, groceries, gifts. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spent money on something just for me that wasn't a necessity. But I clicked that button. And when the confirmation email arrived, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. The course was 8 weeks long. Video lessons, assignments, a private Facebook group for students. The instructor was a guy named Marcus, maybe 35, with that casual confidence of someone who'd figured out how to make money without a traditional job. He talked about finding profitable niches, building online stores, marketing products you never had to touch or ship yourself, making money while you sleep. It sounded like a fantasy, like one of those too good to be true infomercials that promise you wealth if you just buy this one special program. But I watched every video. I did every assignment. I asked questions in the Facebook group, always feeling a little embarrassed, always worried someone would realize I didn't belong. Nobody did. Or if they did, they were kind enough not to say it. By week 4, I had built my first online store. It was clunky. The design was basic. The product photos were pulled from supplier websites, but it was mine. I sold products for pets, specifically custom pet accessories. Bandanas, collars, leashes with patterns and personalization options. Why pets? Because I understood pet owners. I'd had dogs my whole married life. I knew how much people loved their animals, how they'd spend money on them even when they were cutting their own budgets. I knew that love, that irrational, beautiful devotion to a creature that depended on you. My first sale came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after I launched the store. I was washing dishes when I heard the notification sound on my laptop. I almost ignored it, thought it was just another promotional email. But something made me dry my hands and check. Order received. $23.95. Someone in Ohio had bought a custom bandana for their golden retriever. I stood there staring at that screen, and I cried. Not sad tears, not frustrated tears, but the kind of tears that come when something inside you that's been frozen for years finally starts to thaw. $23.95. After expenses and fees, I'd probably made $8. $8. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the proof. Proof that I could do this. Proof that I wasn't too old, too stupid, too late. Proof that I still mattered. If you've ever had a moment like that, where something small became everything, I want you to share it in the comments. Because these moments, they're the ones that change the trajectory of our entire lives. I didn't tell anyone about the store. Not Emma, not David, not my few remaining friends. Partly because I was afraid of failing, but mostly because I wanted this to be mine. Something that existed separate from my identity as someone's mother, someone's ex-wife, someone's has-been. The sales came slowly at first. A few dollars here and there. Some days, nothing. Some days, 2 or 3 orders. I learned to run Facebook ads. Badly at first. I wasted money on campaigns that went nowhere. I targeted the wrong audiences. I wrote copy that didn't convert. But I learned. I adjusted. I improved. I started waking up at 5 in the morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I was excited to check my sales, to respond to customer messages, to tweak my ads, to add new products. I felt like I had when I was 25, starting my first real job, feeling like the world was full of possibilities instead of limitations. By month 3, I was making about $1,200 a month in profit. Not life-changing money, but enough to feel real. Enough to feel like this wasn't just a hobby or a fluke. By month 6, it was $3,500. By month 9, $7,800. I reinvested most of it back into the business. Better ads, better products, better everything. But I also did something else. Something that felt revolutionary. I bought myself things. Not expensive things, not luxury items, but small pleasures I'd denied myself for years. Fresh flowers every week, good coffee instead of whatever was on sale, a massage once a month, books I wanted to read, not just books from the library. These tiny acts of self-worth started changing how I saw myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. Around this time, I started noticing something else. Comments on my ads, messages from customers. Most were normal. Thanks for the fast shipping. My dog looks adorable. The quality is great. But some were different. I love supporting women-owned businesses. So glad to find a company run by someone who actually cares. Your customer service is the best I've experienced. They didn't know I was 67. They didn't know I'd spent the last few years feeling worthless. They just knew they liked what I was building. And that That was intoxicating. I started studying more. I took courses on Instagram marketing, email marketing, customer retention. I joined mastermind groups where entrepreneurs shared strategies and supported each other. I was usually the oldest person in these groups, by decades sometimes. At first, I felt self-conscious. I'd see profile pictures of women in their 30s with perfect makeup and ring lights and thousands of followers. I'd compare myself and feel small. But then something interesting happened. When I contributed ideas in these groups, people listened. When I shared my results, people were impressed. When I offered advice based on my life experience, my understanding of what actually matters to people, they took notes. Because here's what I had that they didn't: perspective, patience, the ability to connect with people on a human level instead of just seeing them as transactions. I understood what it meant to struggle, to feel overlooked, to need something that made life a little bit brighter. And that understanding, that translated into better marketing, better products, better everything. By the end of year one, my little pet accessories store was generating $14,000 a month in profit. $14,000. I sat in my kitchen looking at the spreadsheet I'd built to track everything, and I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, alone in my house, like a person who'd just heard the best joke of their life. A year ago, I'd been invisible, optional, a has-been. Now I was running a six-figure business, and nobody knew. That was the beautiful part. I'd done this entirely on my own. No one to take credit, no one to doubt me, no one to tell me I couldn't. Just me and my laptop and my determination to prove that I still had something to offer this world. But success, I was learning, comes with its own complications, its own challenges, its own moments of reckoning. Because eventually, secrets come out. And when they do, you have to decide who you're going to be. The woman who shrinks back into invisibility, or the woman who stands tall and owns every single inch of what she's built. I was about to find out which one I was. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in October, 18 months after I'd started my business. I was sitting on my back porch, laptop open, responding to customer emails, when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. Emma usually called first. David rarely visited without a reason. I looked up and saw David's black SUV. He got out, along with his wife Jennifer, and my two grandchildren, Sophie and Matthew, 8 and 6 years old. Beautiful kids I barely saw anymore. My heart did that thing it always did when they visited. A combination of joy and sadness. Joy at seeing them. Sadness at knowing how little I factored into their actual lives. I closed my laptop and stood up, putting on the smile I'd perfected over years of pretending everything was fine. "Hey, Mom." David's voice was friendly but distant. The voice you use with someone you're obligated to see but don't particularly want to spend time with. We were in the neighborhood. Thought we'd stop by for a bit. They were never in the neighborhood. I lived 23 minutes from their house. I knew because I'd driven there enough times, hoping to be invited in, hoping to matter. But I smiled and hugged everyone and offered drinks and snacks and played the role I'd been playing for years. The grateful grandmother, the undemanding mother, the woman who was just happy for whatever scraps of attention came her way. The kids ran into the backyard. Jennifer sat on the porch swing, scrolling through her phone. And David, after accepting a glass of iced tea, glanced at my laptop sitting on the side table. Working on something? It was a casual question. The kind you ask when you're making small talk but don't really care about the answer. I could have said no, could have brushed it off, could have kept my secret safe for a little longer. But something in me, maybe pride, maybe exhaustion from hiding, made me tell the truth. Actually, yes. I run an online business, selling pet accessories. He looked at me like I'd just told him I was training to be an astronaut. You? Run a business? The disbelief in his voice was sharp. Not curious disbelief, not impressed disbelief, but the kind that implied the very idea was ridiculous. Jennifer looked up from her phone, suddenly interested. I started it about a year and a half ago. It's doing well. David laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly, but not a kind one either. The laugh of someone who thinks they're in on a joke you don't understand. Mom, that's cute, really. But those online things are usually scams. You need to be careful. There are a lot of people out there targeting older folks who don't understand technology. I felt heat rising in my chest. That familiar sensation of being dismissed, patronized, treated like a child who needed protection from her own decisions. It's not a scam, David. It's a legitimate business. I've been running it successfully for over a year. How much could you possibly be making? Jennifer's voice had that edge to it, the one that pretended to be concerned, but was actually condescending. I hesitated. Not because I was ashamed of the numbers, but because I knew what would happen when I said them out loud. About $14,000 a month in profit. The silence that followed was loud. David stared at me. Jennifer's mouth actually opened slightly. 14,000? David's voice went up. Dollars? A month? Yes. That's not possible. Mom, are you sure you're calculating that right? Are you including expenses, fees, taxes? I'm sure. He pulled out his phone, already typing. What's the website? I want to see this. I gave him the URL. Watched him and Jennifer huddle over his phone, scrolling through my store, my products, my carefully crafted descriptions. This is actually professional. Jennifer sounded surprised, almost disappointed. How did you learn to do this? David looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than polite tolerance in his eyes. I saw confusion, maybe even respect. I took courses, watched tutorials, taught myself. It wasn't easy, but I figured it out. He scrolled more, clicked through pages, examined everything like he was looking for proof that this couldn't be real. And then he found something. A blog post I'd written for the website. An about page where I told my story. Not all of it, but enough. About starting over after divorce. About feeling invisible. About building something from nothing. He read it silently. I watched his face change. You wrote about Dad leaving you. About feeling worthless. I wrote about my experience. My truth. But this is public. Anyone can see this. What if people we know find it? And there it was. Not happiness for me. Not pride in what I'd accomplished. But embarrassment that I'd dared to tell my story. That I'd made the family's private pain public. Why would that matter? I kept my voice calm even though I wanted to scream. It's my story to tell. Jennifer jumped in. It just seems a bit much, don't you think? Airing personal family issues online for strangers to read? It's not airing issues. It's connecting with customers. Being authentic. People respond to real stories. David shook his head, putting his phone away. I don't know, Mom. This whole thing seems risky. You're 67. Shouldn't you be thinking about slowing down, enjoying retirement, not starting businesses and putting yourself out there like this? Why? Why shouldn't I be doing this? Because he struggled to find words that didn't sound cruel. Because you've already lived your life. You raised us. You were married to Dad. Now it's time to just relax. Enjoy your golden years. Not pretend to be some entrepreneur. Pretend. That word landed like a slap. I'm not pretending anything. This is real. The business is real. The money is real. My capability is real. I just don't want you to get hurt. His voice softened, but it made everything worse. These internet things can be unstable. What if it crashes? What if you lose everything? At your age, you don't have time to recover from financial mistakes. At my age, as if 67 was ancient, as if I had one foot in the grave and should spend my remaining years knitting and watching game shows. I've been careful, I've been smart, and I've been successful. Why can't you just be happy for me? I am happy. He said it too quickly. It's just unexpected. You have to admit, it's not what we thought you'd be doing. What did you think I'd be doing? Sitting around waiting for you to visit once a month? Waiting to be relevant again? That's not fair, isn't it? I stood up, my voice stronger now. You called me a has-been, David. Last year. In my own house. You thought I couldn't hear you, but I did. You told Jennifer I was outdated. Worthless. Someone who didn't understand the real world anymore. His face went white. Mom, I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? Explain to me how calling your mother a has-been has a good interpretation. Jennifer stood up, gathering her things. Maybe we should go. This is getting uncomfortable. No. I stepped toward them. You came to my house. You questioned my competence. You dismissed my success. You don't get to leave because the conversation got uncomfortable. David looked torn between anger and shame. I'm sorry, okay? I shouldn't have said that. But you have to understand. From our perspective, you seemed lost, depressed. We worried about you. So when I was sad and small, you worried. But now that I'm successful and strong, you're still not happy. What exactly would make you proud of me? He didn't have an answer to that. Neither did Jennifer. The kids ran back onto the porch, oblivious to the tension, asking for more cookies. I gave them some, kissed their foreheads, and watched as David and Jennifer hurried them into the car. Before he left, David turned back. I really am sorry, Mom, about what I said, and I am proud of you. I just need time to process this. They drove away. I stood in my driveway watching the SUV disappear around the corner, feeling something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not relief that they were gone, but relief that I'd finally stood up for myself, that I'd finally stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable. I went back inside, opened my laptop, and saw 3 new orders had come in during that conversation. 3 people I'd never met had just validated my worth more than my own son had in years. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from energy, from clarity. I realized something profound. I'd been waiting for permission. Permission to succeed. Permission to be proud. Permission to take up space in the world again. But permission isn't something you wait for. It's something you give yourself. I got out of bed, made coffee at midnight, and started planning. Not just for my existing business, but for what came next. Because if I could build one successful business at 67, what else could I do? I started researching real estate investing, stock market strategies, additional online business models. I joined investment groups. I found a financial advisor who specialized in helping people build wealth later in life. I devoured information like I was starving, because in a way I was. Starving for knowledge, for growth, for proof that life didn't end at 60, or 70, or 80. Over the next 6 months, I expanded my business, added new product lines, hired 2 virtual assistants, brought in a designer to overhaul the website. My monthly profit grew from $14,000 to $22,000 to $31,000. I invested in stocks, bought a rental property, started a second online business in a completely different niche. I wasn't just successful, I was thriving. And more importantly, I was doing it on my own terms, without asking for approval, without waiting for validation. By the time I turned 69, my net worth had crossed $1 million. Not inherited, not from the divorce settlement, not from luck or chance, from work, from intelligence, from refusing to accept that my value had an expiration date. I remember the day I saw that number in my accounts, all of them combined. The businesses, the investments, the real estate, the cash reserves, $1,047,812. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten cereal alone for 2 years after Robert left, where I'd cried myself sick more times than I could count, where I'd felt so small I thought I might disappear completely. And I cried again. But this time, they were different tears. Tears of triumph, tears of vindication, tears of a woman who'd been written off and counted out but refused to stay down. I didn't tell anyone about the milestone, not because I was ashamed, but because I'd learned something important over the past few years. Your success doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need validation from people who doubted you. It just needs to be real. It just needs to be yours. David had called a few times since that confrontation in my driveway. The conversations were awkward at first, stilted. He apologized again, properly this time, said he'd been wrong, said he was proud. I accepted the apology because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But I didn't forget. Some words leave marks that never quite fade. Emma, my daughter, had been different. When she found out about the business, her first reaction was excitement. Genuine, unfiltered excitement. She started telling her friends her mom was an entrepreneur. She asked questions. She wanted to learn. Maybe it was a gender thing. Maybe women understand what it means to be underestimated in a way men never quite grasp. Or maybe Emma just had a bigger heart. Either way, her support meant everything. But the person I most wanted to tell, the one whose face I most wanted to see when I shared my success, was Robert. Not because I still loved him. That ship had sailed years ago. But because I wanted him to know he'd made a mistake. That leaving me hadn't broken me. That I'd become more without him than I ever was with him. I got my chance on a Tuesday in March. I was at the grocery store reaching for organic tomatoes when I heard a voice behind me. Sarah? I turned around and there he was. Robert, looking older than I remembered. Grayer. Softer around the middle, but still carrying himself with that confident posture of a man who'd never really been told no. And next to him, pushing a cart, was Kristen, the woman he'd left me for. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from trying to be young when you're not anymore. Trying to compete with time and losing. Robert. My voice was steady, friendly even. How are you? Good. Really good. He seemed surprised by my warmth. You look great. Really great. I did look great. I'd lost weight without trying, just from being busy and active. My hair, which I'd stopped coloring years ago, was a striking silver white that actually suited me. I wore clothes I felt confident in instead of clothes I thought made me invisible. Thank you. I'm doing well. Kristen moved closer, a territorial gesture that made me want to laugh. She had nothing to worry about. I had no interest in revisiting that chapter of my life. We heard you started some kind of online shop. David mentioned it at Christmas. I run several businesses, actually. E-commerce, digital products, real estate investments, keeping busy. Several businesses? Robert's eyebrows went up. That's ambitious. It's working out well. I smiled, and it was genuine. Life's been good. That's wonderful. He seemed at a loss for what to say next. We should catch up sometime. Maybe coffee? Maybe. I said it knowing I never would. There was nothing left to say. Nothing to prove. I'd already won. Not by taking him back or making him jealous or showing him what he'd lost. I'd won by becoming someone who didn't need his validation anymore. I paid for my groceries and left. Didn't look back. Didn't wonder what they said about me after I was gone. Didn't care. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving and sat on my back porch under the stars. The same porch where David had questioned my competence, where I'd felt small and dismissed. But I didn't feel small anymore. I felt expansive, like I'd finally grown into the size I was always meant to be. If you're watching this and you've ever been left behind, counted out, or told you were past your prime, I want you to hear this. Your value doesn't depreciate with age. Your capacity doesn't diminish with time. You are not a has-been. You're a still becoming. Subscribe to this channel if these stories resonate with you. If you believe it's never too late. If you know that the best chapters of your life might still be unwritten. Around this time, something unexpected started happening. Women began reaching out to me. They'd find my business, read my story on the About page, and send emails. Long, heartfelt emails about their own lives, their own struggles, their own dreams they thought were dead. A woman named Patricia, 72, wrote to say she'd started learning graphic design after reading my story. Another woman, Margaret, 65, told me she'd enrolled in real estate courses. Another, Susan, 70, had launched a consulting business using skills from her 40-year career that she thought nobody valued anymore. They called me an inspiration, but they were inspiring me, proving that what I'd done wasn't an anomaly. It was possible for anyone willing to try. I started responding to every email, spending hours offering advice, encouragement, resources. It became as important to me as the businesses themselves, because I realized something profound. Success means nothing if you climb alone. Real fulfillment comes from reaching back and pulling others up with you. I created a private Facebook group for women over 60 who wanted to start businesses or pursue dreams they'd postponed. I called it Silver Ambitions. It started with 12 women. Within 6 months, it had over 4,000 members. We shared resources, celebrated wins, supported each other through failures and frustrations. We became a community of women refusing to be invisible. The media started noticing. A local newspaper ran a story about me. Then a regional magazine. Then a national website that focused on entrepreneurship. Each article brought more attention, more interviews, more opportunities. A publisher reached out about writing a book. A conference asked me to speak. Universities invited me to guest lecture. At 69 years old, I was busier than I'd been at 29. But this time I was busy building my own dreams instead of supporting someone else's. David called after one of the articles came out. A big one in a major business publication, with my photo and a detailed story about building wealth after 65. Mom, I just read the Forbes article. I had no idea things had grown this much. Why didn't you tell me? You didn't ask. I wasn't being cruel, just honest. I should have asked. I should have been paying attention. I'm sorry. This apology felt different, heavier, more real. I appreciate that, David. I do. But you need to understand something. I didn't do this for you. I didn't do it to prove you wrong or to make you proud. I did it for me, because I needed to prove to myself that I still mattered. You've always mattered, Mom. Have I? Because it didn't feel that way for a long time. It felt like I'd become furniture in my own life, background noise in everyone else's story. He was quiet for a long moment. You're right. We took you for granted. I took you for granted. I'm sorry. Apologies are good, David, but actions matter more. Don't tell me I matter. Show me. Be present. Be interested. Treat me like someone whose life is still happening, not someone whose life is over. I will. I promise I will. We talked for over an hour that day. Really talked. Not the surface-level conversations we'd been having for years, but deep, honest, sometimes painful conversation about our relationship, about his childhood, about the divorce, about everything we'd avoided saying. It didn't fix everything. Years of distance can't be repaired in one phone call, but it was a start. A real start. Months passed. My businesses continued growing. I hired employees. Real employees, not just contractors. People who depended on the companies I'd built for their livelihoods. That responsibility was heavy but satisfying. I moved out of the house Robert and I had shared. Not because I couldn't afford to keep it, but because I wanted something that was entirely mine. Something with no memories of who I used to be. I bought a modern townhouse downtown. Sleek, minimalist, nothing like the traditional suburban home I'd lived in for decades. It felt like shedding an old skin. Emma helped me decorate. We spent weekends shopping for furniture, hanging art, making it feel like home. Not the home I'd had, but the home I wanted now. She brought the grandkids over. Sophie, now 10, asked me about my businesses. Really asked with genuine curiosity. She wanted to know how websites worked, how you made money online, how you knew what people wanted to buy. I showed her everything. Opened my laptop and walked her through it all. She was fascinated, said she wanted to be an entrepreneur someday too. My heart almost burst, not just from pride, but from the knowledge that I was showing her something important. That women, at any age, can build, can create, can succeed, that we don't have to wait for permission or approval or perfect timing. We just have to start. The speaking invitation came on a rainy Thursday in November. I was sitting in my home office reviewing quarterly reports when the email arrived. It was from a major women's conference, one of those events that draws thousands of attendees from around the world. They wanted me to be a keynote speaker, to share my story on their main stage in front of 3,000 people. My first instinct was to say no, to make up an excuse, to tell them they'd made a mistake and surely wanted someone younger, more polished, more qualified. But then I caught myself. That voice in my head, the one telling me I wasn't enough, wasn't mine. It belonged to years of conditioning, to a society that told me my relevance expired somewhere around my 50th birthday. I responded yes before I could talk myself out of it. The conference was 3 months away. I spent that time preparing, writing my speech, practicing it, recording myself and watching it back, cringing at first, then gradually becoming more comfortable with my own voice, my own presence. Emma helped me pick out an outfit, something professional but authentic. We settled on a deep burgundy suit that made me feel powerful without trying too hard. The night before the conference, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over the speech in my mind, worrying I'd forget something, worrying I'd stumble, worrying people would see through me and realize I was just a 69-year-old woman who'd gotten lucky. But when I walked onto that stage the next morning, something shifted. I looked out at 3,000 faces, women of all ages, some my age, some younger, some older, all of them looking at me with anticipation, with hope, with that universal expression of someone waiting to hear that they're not alone. And I realized I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. I told them my story, not the sanitized version, not the version that made me look perfect or heroic, but the real version, the messy, painful, difficult version. I told them about being called a has-been, about the divorce, about feeling invisible and worthless and convinced my life was over, about crying in grocery store parking lots and wondering if this was all there was. And then I told them about the decision, the moment I chose to bet on myself even when nobody else would, about the late nights learning things that terrified me, about the small victories that added up to something bigger, about becoming someone I was proud of instead of someone others were comfortable with. I told them about my son's words, about my ex-husband's face at the grocery store, about hitting $1 million and crying at my kitchen table. But most importantly, I told them that none of it would have happened if I'd waited for the pain to stop before I started moving. That action creates motivation, not the other way around, that you don't need confidence to begin. You need courage. And courage is just fear that takes one step anyway. When I finished speaking, the silence lasted maybe 2 seconds, and then the room erupted. Not polite applause, not courtesy clapping, but the kind of applause that sounds like thunder, like validation, like permission being granted to every woman in that room to take up space again. They gave me a standing ovation that lasted 4 minutes. I stood on that stage, looking out at thousands of women on their feet, many of them crying, and I felt something I'd never felt before, complete unconditional pride in myself. After the speech, the conference organizers had to extend my book signing session by 2 hours because the line was so long. Women waited for over an hour just to have 30 seconds with me, to tell me their stories, to say thank you, to say they'd needed to hear what I said. A woman named Ruth, 74, told me she'd given up on her dream of opening a bakery after her husband died. She'd convinced herself she was too old, too tired, too late, but she was going to try now. She was going to do it. Another woman, Caroline, 61, told me she'd been planning to retire early from a job she hated because she thought that's what you were supposed to do at her age. But now she was going to quit and start the consulting business she'd always dreamed of. Another woman, Helen, 57, told me she'd been staying in a marriage that made her miserable because she thought no one would hire a divorced woman her age. But she was going to leave. She was going to choose herself. Story after story. Woman after woman. Each one proving that what I'd experienced wasn't unique. It was universal. This feeling of being discarded by a world that values youth above wisdom, beauty above character, potential above experience. But we were changing that. One story at a time. One woman at a time. One decision at a time. The speaking engagement led to more. I spent the next year traveling, sharing my story, encouraging women to stop waiting for permission to matter again. My businesses continued growing, but they weren't the focus anymore. They were proof of concept, evidence that it was possible. But the real work was in the hearts and minds of women who needed to hear that they weren't finished, that they weren't has-beens, that they were still becoming. I turned 70 in May. Emma threw me a party, not a big production, just close friends and family, people who'd been there through the transformation, people who'd watched me rebuild from ashes. David came with his whole family. He gave a toast that made me cry. He talked about how wrong he'd been, how much he'd underestimated me, how watching my journey had changed the way he saw aging, women, capability, everything. He said I'd taught him that growth isn't something that stops at a certain age. It's something you choose every single day, regardless of the number on your birth certificate. Sophie, my granddaughter, now 11, gave me a card she'd made. Inside, she'd written in careful handwriting, "When I grow up, I want to be like you, Grandma, not afraid of anything." I held that card for a long time, because she was wrong about one thing. I was afraid. I'm still afraid sometimes. Fear doesn't go away just because you're successful or confident or older. But fear isn't the enemy. Letting fear make your decisions is the enemy. Letting fear convince you that you're too old, too late, too much of a has-been to try. That night, after everyone left, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. I thought about that woman I'd been 5 years earlier, broken, invisible, convinced her life was over at 64, and I thought about who I'd become, not perfect, not fearless, not without scars or doubts or moments of weakness, but someone who'd proven that the story doesn't end when people stop paying attention. It begins when you start paying attention to yourself. My phone buzzed. A message in the Silver Ambitions group. A woman named Dorothy, 71, had just made her first $1,000 from a business she'd started 3 months ago. She was celebrating. The group was celebrating with her. I smiled and typed a response. "Congratulations, Dorothy. This is just the beginning." And I meant it, because I'd learned that beginnings don't belong only to the young. They belong to anyone brave enough to start, anyone willing to fail, anyone who refuses to accept that their value has an expiration date. The next morning, I woke up to an email from a production company. They wanted to make a documentary about my journey, about women rebuilding their lives after being dismissed by society. I didn't respond right away. I made coffee, watched the sunrise, thought about what that would mean. More exposure, more vulnerability, more risk of judgment or criticism, but also more impact. More women hearing the message, more proof that it's never too late. I responded yes. Over the next 6 months, cameras followed me around. They interviewed my children, my friends, women from the Silver Ambitions group. They filmed me working, speaking, living my normal life. The documentary premiered at a film festival and won an audience award. It was picked up by a major streaming platform. Within weeks, it had been viewed by millions of people around the world. My inbox exploded. Messages from women in their 60s, 70s, 80s, women from countries I'd never visited, women who'd spent years feeling invisible, worthless, finished. They were starting businesses, going back to school, leaving bad situations, pursuing dreams they'd buried under decades of responsibility and sacrifice. And they were crediting me, saying I'd given them permission, saying I'd shown them it was possible. But I hadn't given them anything they didn't already have. I just reminded them it was there. The strength, the capability, the worth that never actually went away, just got buried under other people's expectations. A journalist asked me once what I wanted my legacy to be, what I wanted to be remembered for. I thought about it for a long time before answering, because the truth was, I didn't care about being remembered. I cared about impact, about change, about making sure that future generations of women never have to hear the word has been and believe it. I want women to know that their value isn't tied to their youth or their beauty or their ability to make other people comfortable, that they can start over at 60, at 70, at 80. That success isn't about how young you are when you achieve it, but about whether you give yourself permission to try. I'm 72 now. 3 years have passed since the documentary. 3 years of continued growth, continued challenges, continued proof that life doesn't stop just because society tells you it should. My businesses are still thriving. I've sold 2 of them for significant profits and started a new venture, this time focusing on helping other women over 60 launch their own companies. It's part consulting, part mentorship, part community building. I've hired a team of women, all over 55, who'd been told they were too old to be valuable in the workforce. They're some of the most talented, dedicated, hard-working people I've ever had the privilege of working with. The Silver Ambitions Group now has over 50,000 members across 43 countries. We've helped launch more than 3,000 businesses. We've created a scholarship fund for women over 60 who want to go back to school. We've built a network of support that I wish had existed when I was at my lowest point. But the numbers, as impressive as they are, aren't what matter most to me anymore. What matters are the individual stories, the personal transformations, the moments when a woman realizes she's not finished, she's just getting started. Last month, I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter, not an email, from a woman named Margaret in Scotland. She was 76 years old. She'd spent her entire adult life as a homemaker, raising 5 children, caring for her husband until he died of cancer 3 years ago. Her children had moved her into a retirement community, well-meaning, but essentially putting her on a shelf to wait out her remaining years. She'd been depressed, feeling like her life was over, like she had nothing left to contribute. Then she'd watched the documentary, and something in her had awakened. She'd started painting, something she'd loved as a young woman but had abandoned when she got married. Her paintings were now selling in local galleries. She'd been commissioned for several pieces. She was making enough money to move out of the retirement community and into her own apartment. But more than that, she wrote, she felt alive again. She felt like herself, not someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, just herself. Margaret, an artist. A woman with value independent of anyone else's needs or expectations. I keep that letter on my desk. On days when I'm tired or frustrated or wondering if any of this matters, I read it. And I remember why I do this work, why I share my story, why I refuse to be quiet about what's possible. Because for every Margaret who writes to me, there are thousands more who never will, who will quietly start over, who will quietly reclaim their power, who will quietly prove that age is just a number, not a death sentence for dreams. David and I have rebuilt our relationship. It's not perfect. We still have moments of tension, old wounds that haven't completely healed. But there's respect now. Real respect. He asks my advice about business decisions. He includes me in family plans without making me feel like an obligation. He tells his friends about me with pride instead of embarrassment. Jennifer apologized to me last year. It took her longer than David, but when she finally did, it was sincere. She told me she'd been threatened by me, by my relationship with David, by my presence in their lives. My success had forced her to confront her own insecurities about aging, about her own value beyond her youth and appearance. We're not close. We probably never will be. But there's peace between us. And that's enough. Emma and I talk almost every day. She's become one of my closest friends, not just my daughter. She tells me things she never told me when I was younger, when I was so consumed with being the perfect mother that I forgot to be a real person. She started her own business now, too. Nothing to do with what I do, but inspired by watching me take the leap. She left her corporate job and launched a sustainable fashion brand. It's struggling in some ways, thriving in others. But she's happy. She's building something that matters to her. And when she calls me frustrated or scared or doubting herself, I can give her advice that actually means something. Because I've been there. Recently. I know what it feels like to risk everything on a dream that might fail. Sophie is 16 now. She's already started 2 small businesses. Both online, both profitable. She talks about entrepreneurship the way other teenagers talk about music or sports. It's not just what she does. It's who she is. She tells people her grandmother is her biggest inspiration. That makes me prouder than any amount of money ever could. Last week, I was invited to speak at Harvard Business School. Harvard, the same institution I never had a chance to attend because I got married young, had children young, followed the path that was expected of women of my generation. I stood in front of a classroom full of MBA students, most of them younger than my grandchildren, and I taught them about resilience, about starting over, about the unique advantages of building businesses later in life. They took notes. They asked questions. They treated me not like a novelty or an exception, but like an expert, like someone who had valuable knowledge worth learning. After the class, several students came up to talk to me. One young woman, maybe 25, told me her mother was 58 and had just been laid off from a job she'd worked at for 30 years. Her mother was depressed, convinced her career was over, that no one would hire someone her age. This student asked if I'd be willing to talk to her mother, to share my story, to give her hope. I said yes, of course. And I thought about how different the world might be if we stopped treating aging as decline and started treating it as evolution. If we stopped seeing older women as irrelevant and started seeing them as experienced, wise, capable, valuable. The conversation I had with that woman's mother lasted 2 hours. By the end, she was already planning her next move, already thinking about skills she had that the market needed, already remembering who she was before the job, before the title, before the paycheck. That's what this work is really about. Reminding women of who they are, who they've always been underneath the roles and the expectations and the limitations others placed on them. I've been approached about writing a second book. This one not just about my story, but about the science of reinvention, the psychology of starting over, the practical steps any woman can take to rebuild her life regardless of her age or circumstances. I'm considering it, not because I need more attention or more validation, but because there's still work to do. Still women who need to hear this message. Still a culture that needs to change its narrative about aging and women and worth. I think about that day 5 years ago when I overheard my son call me a has-been. How much that hurt. How small it made me feel. How close I came to accepting it as truth instead of challenging it as the lie it was. If I could go back and tell that 67-year-old version of myself anything, it would be this. The pain you're feeling right now is not permanent. The worthlessness you feel is not real. The story you think is ending is actually just beginning. You're going to build something extraordinary. Not because you're special or lucky or destined for greatness, but because you're going to decide that you deserve more than what you've been given. You're going to choose yourself when everyone else has chosen to overlook you. And that choice, that simple decision to matter, is going to change everything. I still have hard days. Days when imposter syndrome creeps in. Days when I'm tired and wonder if I should just retire for real this time. Days when the weight of other people's expectations feels heavy. But those days are fewer now. And when they come, I have tools to handle them. A community to support me. Proof that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined. I've learned that confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. One decision at a time. One risk at a time. One moment of choosing courage over comfort at a time. I've learned that it's never too late to become who you might have been. That dreams don't have expiration dates. That the only thing standing between you and the life you want is the story you keep telling yourself about why you can't have it. And I've learned that being called a has-been is only devastating if you believe it, if you accept it, if you let someone else's limited imagination define your reality. But you don't have to accept it. You can reject it. You can prove it wrong. You can become living proof that women don't decline with age. We refine. We deepen. We become more of who we've always been meant to be. So if you're watching this, wherever you are in the world, whatever your age, whatever your circumstances, I want you to know something. You are not finished. You are not too old. You are not a has-been. You are a woman with decades of experience, wisdom, resilience, and capability. You are someone who survived challenges these younger generations can't even imagine. You are valuable not in spite of your age, but because of it. And if you decide right now that you're going to bet on yourself one more time, that you're going to pursue that dream you buried years ago, that you're going to stop asking for permission and start taking action, your life can change. Not might change, not could change, will change. Because that's what happens when a woman decides she's done being small, done being quiet, done accepting less than she deserves. She becomes unstoppable. I know because I lived it, because I am living it, every single day. They called me a has-been, and I showed them a fortune. But more importantly, I showed myself that my worth was never tied to their opinions in the first place. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories like this. Stories of women who refuse to disappear, who refuse to accept the narrative, who prove that the best is yet to come. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. A mother, a grandmother, a friend, a stranger who looks like she's forgotten she matters, and leave a comment telling me your story, where you are right now, what you're building, what you're dreaming about, what you're going to do next. Because your story matters. Your dreams matter. You matter. Not because of what you've done or who you've been, or what you look like or how old you are, but because you're here. You're alive. You're still becoming. And that, more than any bank account or business success or external validation, is what makes you extraordinary. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that your story isn't over. It's not. It's just getting good.